When we talk about 1,700 CEOs, you probably thought an email, click through to a website, go through and fill some things in and summarise them, as McKinsey generally does. But we actually sit for an hour with each of our CEOs, with a partner such as myself or someone else, talking to them about the questions. So we have a questionnaire, but the CEO doesn't get the questionnaire. We talk them through and use cards to get them to do ratings and whatever. So that's why it's the biggest face-to-face survey of CEOs anyone kind of knows about, and then the numbers have grown over the time. If I were to give you the elevator pitch, it's CEOs are creating more open organisations. They're using technology and other things in order to create that openness. And what they're doing is developing different relationships with their employees and with their customers and also with their partners. And they're doing that to drive innovation and growth. So openness to create new relationships to drive innovation and growth. And I'll talk a little bit about each of those. So first, employees, and I talked about openness. On this diagram, what we've done is we asked the question about, are you finding more pressures that take you towards operational control or towards operational openness? And normally it's a scale from 2 to 0 to 2, so people can say somewhere in the middle. And we've also overlaid that with our outperformers and underperformers. So you can see that 48% of the outperformers said they were developing more open organisations, whereas only 37% of the underperformers said that. Interestingly, outperformers are also slightly more likely to be at the control end, but the place you really, really don't want to be is balancing. Seems as if there are two valid strategies, which is either control or openness, but don't get stuck kind of in the middle. Or maybe what it shows is CEOs who haven't even thought about this were not very successful in driving their organisations. So our sense is that that openness is driven in two ways. First, that the customers outside the organisation now expect to look inside the organisation much more. The barriers around the organisation are being pulled down. And also internally, the generations now entering the workforce won't tolerate control and closed environments in the way that perhaps people would before. So there's a demand for openness internally, and to be successful in the workforce, you have to be open. Sorry, in the marketplace, you have to be open as well. So if you're going to be more open, how do you control? Which is kind of an interesting way of putting it. But if you're a CEO, you generally don't want chaos. If you're a customer, you don't want chaos. When you walk into the Apple store, it's all very hip and trendy and cool, and no one's dressed formally, and you have those nice tables, but the same thing happens every time you go in there. You have someone come and talk to you, they're very organised, everything happens, and they deal with you in a pretty consistent way. So the service is good. So it's hip and cool and trendy, but actually that doesn't happen unless someone makes it happen that way. So how do you get people to behave in that way if you're kind of coming back from rules and control? Well, our sense is that people do that by using ethics and values and purpose and mission and a collaborative environment. So you take away the rules, but you have to communicate a very clear purpose and mission for the organisation, a set of values that gives tools to the people that work in the organisation to know what's expected of them when they're in that environment. So IBM, for example, has a set of values that were developed through inevitably in IBM, an online kind of debate over a 72-hour period. About 40,000 of the folks in IBM contributed, and what we drove there was a sense of a consensus about what the values were, and then that helped us to align people. I think one of the tests of values that you should apply, it's a good set of values if one of the people in the team faced with a dilemma can use the values to decide what they should do. If actually the values don't provide any sense of guidance to action, they're not a very good set of actions. They have to help people with the choices that they face. So in our terms, people are moving away from rules and moving towards relying on values, ethics, purpose and mission. And this collaboration word you'll see crop up a lot as well. We asked another question, which was, and this will be all interesting to those of you who will be graduating soon, what do CEOs think are the attributes that they look for from employees. What makes employees successful in the workplace? You can see here collaboration, communication, creativity and flexibility were the 4 things that came out highest. Interesting, tech savvy, still 40% of CEOs, or 41% of CEOs, but maybe that's a bit like saying, can they write? You know, it's an expected tool for people to bring, that they know how to operate in a technology environment, that it's not a differentiator. When we recruit at IBM, we don't care which discipline people come from. People sometimes turn up assuming that if they've done computer science or information systems, that's the best thing for IBM, but we're agnostic on which school you come from. It's the attributes that we look for. So, thinking about employees for a moment, what was the advice that we gave to the CEOs about what they should do? So if CEOs are creating these new relationships with employees to engage them, engaging them through values, well, obviously having the right sorts of shared beliefs is really important, working around values, making sure that they're not just things that appear on the wall, but actually they live within the organisation. Helping employees to cope with change. Because the sense in which someone chose a job and then you went and did that job for 30 years or whatever it was is long gone. So actually you join an organisation and the role that you perform and the job that you do will change many times over a working career, even if you were to stay at one organisation. And then lastly, collaboration is really important. And clearly technology has a role here, but it's not just technology, it's about the culture and values in the organisation to highlight collaboration. So partnering as a theme has been a very big thing all the way through since 2004 when we started this study. And by partnering we simply mean an organisation, instead of doing everything that it needs to do in-house, it finds business partners to do some of those things for it. Whether it's outsourcing security in the office, or it's outsourcing manufacturing, or it's outsourcing call centres, lots of things that you might outsource, use a partner to do. And partnering's been a very big theme all the way through. One reason may be that it reduces risk to some extent, because if everybody works for you and you own all of the assets, if the business changes, coping with that change is all your problem, whereas if you partner with someone else, maybe you can just stop buying as much from them and therefore they have to deal with it. And of course if you partner with specialised firms, they've maybe got lots of customers so that they can cope with the fact that your business goes down because someone else's business goes up. So maybe the whole cycle becomes more efficient. And we've got organisations that are creating different relationships to engage their employees through values. We've got organisations that are building relationships with their customers as individuals. And we've got organisations that are partnering to innovate. But what does the CEO need to do? So at the end of the hour, we would turn it around and say, well, we've talked a lot about your organisation. What is it that you need to be good at, or other CEOs need to be good at in order for you to be successful? And here are the answers. Again, I think they got to pick 5 of what would be most important in the next 3 to 5 years. Maybe not surprising that customer obsession came out number 1. We had been talking quite a lot about customers, so probably, no doubt the earlier debate you have with the CEO does have an impact. What's really interesting is 2 leadership qualities coming out. Now, because of the way this thing works, for inspirational leadership and leadership teaming to both come out at the top, lots of CEOs must have picked both of them, which is kind of interesting because sometimes if you create 2 similar concepts in these things, you split the vote and it kind of comes out low, so it must have been very important for them. What we meant by these 2 different ones was the inspirational leader is the kind of, I'm out there on the front and everyone's following me leader, and the leadership teaming is my job is to get the leadership team together and to be successful. One of the interesting areas is that CEOs in China tend to talk less about partnering. So they aspire to be great innovators, So they're more likely to vote to be an innovation leader than a fast follower, but they're much less likely to focus on partnering as a way of driving innovation. So that's one of the areas that we talk to our clients about in China, that maybe that's a way for them to get an advantage. So let me just wrap up there. So those were the three areas: empowering employees through values, engaging customers as individuals, and amplifying innovation with partnerships. And then in terms of what the outperformers do, they're more open in their organisations, and they're good at managing change. They differentiate through being able to get data, through being able to draw insight from it and being able to act on it. Kind of not surprising, is it, that would drive performance. They're more likely to partner for innovation and to try to disrupt the industry they're in. So those were the messages that came out of this study. If I could, an interesting reflection. In the year that IBM was 100, which I think it was last year, wasn't it? Last year. Coca-Cola was 125, because I remember walking through, I think it was the Times Square MTR, and it was covered with, so I guess that suggests it's nothing to do with the business you're in, because they're clearly in a very different business than IBM is. For me, I kind of look at this partly, Ali, as a consultant, because I kind of got bought 10 years ago, so I didn't grow up. If you cut my head off, it doesn't say IBM yet. So I kind of look at it a bit from the outside. And what was interesting was, because we've just had the 100-year anniversary, there was a lot of, IBM's interesting, didn't do a lot of celebration. So interestingly, there was no dinner to say, let's take you all out because you've been here for 100 years. Lots of client events to talk about, we've been here for 100 years, and lots of talk about what we have to do the next 100. So I think there's something about trying to stay away from self-congratulation. I think the other thing I'd say is you have to remember that a near-death experience has a dramatic effect on an organisation. If I just talked about the near-death experience, that was fundamentally because IBM had invented the PC but thought it had no commercial value. So IBM carried on making mainframes, which had been the source of huge profit and huge market dominance. And then when the PC came along and ate our lunch, which was actually Apple and others who kind of saw it and picked it up and ran with it. One of the versions that one of you gave was, if you could go back and advise you, Stephen, when you were 20, what advice would you give about where you went, which I thought was a nice way of putting it. So let me break that up into different things. So the first one was, what does IBM look for in consultants? So I've kind of said something that we don't look for, which is you don't have to be, at the moment, a technology whiz. And what I would say is, I'll answer not just for the business consulting, but we recruit large numbers of people into consulting, some of whom do go through the technology routes and become very expert in technology and technology implementations. I think we look for, we kind of look for a bunch of smarts, which I guess you'd expect. If you're not clever, you wouldn't be here, and you certainly won't be in IBM. So kind of that's a kind of given. But to be honest, at the level that we're recruiting, we're not going to pick you because your grade was slightly better than someone else, because the cut we can afford is high enough that the high grades are taken for granted. I think there's a whole bundle of there's a sort of problem-solving mindset which is very important to us. That I have to be careful here, because otherwise I won't be following Ginny's views about all of this. But I would still say that good consultants are problem solvers. So that if all you do is fix problems for people, then there's a limited number of problems to fix. If you help a CEO envision the possibility and then to make it happen. So I think that emphasises the ability to be innovative, and that not everybody's going to invent something, but the ability to stretch yourself and think innovatively, I think, as a balance alongside problem finding and problem fixing, I think becomes increasingly important. And then I think there's a very important set of personal skills and attributes. So you saw collaboration, and actually it's interesting because in the survey the CEOs assume that both you would like a collaborative environment and that they want you to be collaborative, and I would say that we definitely want that from our consultants. you need to be able to communicate with people. If you can't communicate with people, you can't be a consultant.